Hello, greetings from Tokyo, Asia. Excellencies, distinguished partners, participants, guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our webinar, African Economic Outlook 2020 Asia Supplement. I'm Takashi Hanajiri, head of the Asia External Representation Office of the African Development Bank. Humbled and honored to take a moderating role of this event. Asia External Representation Office, my office is AFDB's first representation outside Africa in Tokyo, Japan, since 2012. AFDB currently has 4 member countries in Asia. Currently, India, China, Japan, and Republic of Korea. About 40 years of partnership. The bank has been receiving strong cooperation. For example, symbolic events between those Asian countries and African continent, such as FOCAC as for China, India-Africa Forum Summit, FOAFEC as for Korea, and TICAP with Japan. Many bilateral trust funds, I don't mention to that, it's endless. And the bank's annual meeting hosted in Asia, Shanghai 2007, Ahmedabad 2017, and Busan 2018. Very grateful, much appreciation. Today here, for the first time ever, the African Economic Outlook AEO related presentation will bring together the AFDB's experts and a very wide range of the Asian stakeholders, including but not limited to public sector policymakers, African diplomatic corps based in Asia, governmental institutions people, as well as representatives of private sector, academia, and civil society. This webinar is simple opening remarks, presentation, comment, and a little interaction discussion, then Q&A session. Right now, due to unprecedented challenges posted by COVID-19 pandemic, we are living in so-called new normal. On the brighter side of this new normal, we can easily participate in various webinars like ours with attractive, interesting themes. But it is also very easy for us to lead these webinars. Small children, your partner, spouse, your dog, or cat can easily attract your attention so that make you leave. Our enemies are very strong. Therefore, for success of the event, attractiveness of contents, gravity of discussion, value adds are essential more than ever. And above all, proper time management is critical. I would like to point out 2 housekeeping matters for this webinar in this regard. First, to participants who pose questions, thank you, but please make it concise. We need to manage ourselves into very tight 19 minutes constraint, which is generated by time zone difference between Asia and Africa, and also generated by our human beings' limit of concentration staring at PC screen. So I sincerely appreciate your cooperation. And second, very frequently asked question. Also, please note, presentation materials, slides used in this webinar will be posted on the bank's Asian languages website afterward. So don't worry. Now, let us move on to opening remarks. Let me briefly introduce Dr. Sherif, who will make opening remarks. Dr. Khaled F. Sherif is the Vice President for Regional Department Integration and Business Delivery Complex at the AFDB, Born in Egypt, Dr. Sharif has extensive international experience with multilateral and bilateral department agencies and is an economic scholar and academician. Prior to his appointment as vice president at the AFDB in 2016, Dr. Sharif held several positions at the World Bank in Washington, D.C., 26 years in total. He has worked at the Agency for International Development in Egypt from 1987 to 1990, and the Ministry of Cabinet Affairs and Administrative Development in Egypt. He regularly teaches at the following institutions: the George Washington School of Business, the American University Kogod School of Business, the American University in Cairo Schools of Economics and Business Administration, the Harvard Institute for International Development, Boston University, the University of Central Michigan, University of Pittsburgh, the German Chamber of Commerce Management Development Program. Please now virtually welcome our bank's Vice President, Dr. Khaled Sharif. VP Khaled, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. And allow me to thank the Asia External Representation Office and the Macroeconomic Policy Forecasting and Research Department of the African Development Bank for making this webinar possible today. I'm pleased to be asked to open this virtual presentation of the African Economic Outlook Supplement to the bank's partners and stakeholders in the Asia region. As you all know, the current coronavirus disease, COVID-19, which began as a simple health crisis in the city of Wuhan, has quickly turned into an unprecedented economic crisis, with disruptions taking the toll in both developing and developed countries, and inflicting a global economic downturn that is still unfolding. And despite the COVID-19 and its arrival in Africa, which came later than other parts of the world, the first case was confirmed in Egypt on February 14, 2020, and it has now spread out rapidly across the continent and has triggered a series of policy responses that have important economic implications. Today, there are more than 1.3 million reported cases in Africa, with more than 32,000 deaths. No one anticipated that the virus could have had such a profound impact on the world economy, and no one can still tell today with 100% certainty how long this pandemic will last. When the African Development Bank released in January 2020 its projections for economic growth and prospects for the African continent, there was no single confirmed case of COVID-19 in Africa. It was clear as the pandemic spread out rapidly across the continent that the bank's previous strong growth projections contained in the 2020 African Economic Outlook were no longer in line with the new economic reality of Africa and the world, given the significant economic and health-related impacts of the pandemic. As they say, exceptional circumstances call for exceptional measures. It was necessary to reassess the situation and revise our growth projections, and hence the outlook for 2020 and 2021 to account for the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Hence the release of the AEO 2020 supplement amid COVID-19 in July 2020, the first of its kind since the production of the AEO started in 2003. The supplement provides revised projections for Africa's economic growth and outlook for 2020 and 2021, assesses the impacts of COVID-19, and offers policy prescriptions on safe strategies to reopen economies and accelerate recovery after the pandemic. There are many important takeaways from the supplement, but let me talk just about two. I'm sure Dr. Chukwu of the bank's research department will provide greater detail during his presentation. First, the COVID-19 pandemic has shed light on the urgency to build resilience of Africa's healthcare systems and economies to improve countries' preparation for future shocks. This means that African countries will need to rethink their current development strategies and priorities, which have clearly showed their limits and weaknesses. For that, the continent will need the support and expertise of all, and I'm really glad that today we have in the audience many Asian investors and development practitioners who can share their insights on how Asia can contribute in this regard. Second, the supplement has highlighted the strong and the importance of African countries in terms of their exposure and vulnerability to the pandemic. For instance, although all African economies will be affected by the pandemic, the severity will vary considerably from one country to the other, depending on their own individual economic characteristics and their initial conditions. And despite the overall negative impact, 25 countries in the African continent are still projected to maintain positive growth. And this is obviously excellent given that 25 of 54 countries in the continent are still forecasting positive growth. And this urges us to avoid the one-size-fits-all solution to address the effects of COVID-19 in Africa. My hope is therefore that this webinar will help enrich the debate on what appropriate measures are needed to support African countries in their recovery from the pandemic, drawing particularly on the Asian experience. And let me take just another minute to emphasize that there are several categories of countries that are affected in different ways. So of the 54 countries in the African continent, there are 6 countries that are known as the Big Six. The Big Six are the countries who rely primarily on one major export, which is oil. And oil for them represents roughly about 70% of their total revenue, both domestic and foreign. Now, obviously, these 6 countries have been very seriously adversely affected, primarily because of the downturn in commodity prices for oil. And for them, their primary challenge is now how to manage their revenue situation, what to do about potential debt default, how they can continue to find ways to make their debt service payments, and they are probably among the countries that are hardest hit. Across the continent, there are countries whose resilience is somewhat limited. So when we look at countries that are fragile in our definition are countries that have limited resilience and are dependent on 1, 2, or 3 primary exports and nothing else. So if you look at West Africa specifically, what you will see in West Africa is West Africa depends on 2 primary exports, coffee beans and cocoa beans. As commodity prices for both coffee beans and cocoa beans continue to spiral downwards, again, these countries of this part of the continent are also struggling with domestic revenues. They're struggling being net food importers, and they're struggling to make wage, pension payments to the populace as a whole, and also suffer from weak safety nets. So in reality, some countries are harder hit by COVID than others, but Africa is an interesting continent because it isn't the pandemic that is affecting the continent. It is primarily the effect of commodity prices on countries that depend on 2, 3, 4 exports for their as a source of their primary income and for their livelihood. These countries are all struggling today, but as I said, there's 2 baskets of countries. 25 countries still showing positive growth, the countries that are more resilient and have the ability to withstand these shocks, and the countries that are less resilient and have more challenges in dealing with the COVID shock, which in this case translates into deteriorating prices on commodity markets. So as we move forward, what we are all trying to do, especially at the different departments across the African Development Bank, is provide stimulus to these countries to make sure that they can rebound and build back better. We're trying to ensure that they have the resources that they need for food imports. We're trying to make sure they have the resources for countries that generate electricity using fuel oil, that they have the resources to buy it. We're trying to make sure that for countries where country downgrades are now taking place across the continent because of debt repayment issues, we're trying to help them through this particular problem. We're trying to help countries maintain their debt positions who are falling into arrears. And just to close, we're also trying to make sure that the informal sector can still function because as most of you know, there is a very large informal sector across the African continent. And to do so, we're attempting to provide resources for social safety nets and social protection. So just to close, let me just thank the distinguished ambassadors and the heads of the diplomatic missions that are in attendance. And I'm sure that Professor Tetsushi Sonobe, the Dean of the Asian Development Bank Institute, will also give us additional highlights that will be useful to everyone in attendance. And my thanks to Mr. Takashi Hanjari, the head of the Asian External Representation Office of the African Development Bank, for making this possible. And thank you very much for your attention. Back to you, Takashi. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice President Dr. Sharif, for truly inspiring words and well-organized summary of the situation in Africa and what the bank is doing. Actually, you are the most central person for the bank's response to the COVID-19 situation in African continent. So yeah, a really good introduction for possible solution and also the possible Asia-Africa cooperation. Very good. Very strong message to Asian audience. So thank you very much, VP. Next, we are entering into the presentation part. I would like to briefly introduce Dr. Chukwu, who is today's presenter of AEO Supplement to you. Dr. Chukwu is the OIC Manager of Macroeconomic Policy, Debt Sustainability, and Forecasting. As manager, he is responsible for the preparation of some of the bank's knowledge products, such as this African Economic Outlook, under the guidance of the director. Previously, he was a visiting scholar at the IMF and had consulted for several institutions, including IDRC, UNUWIDER, Africa Economic Research Consortium, UNEP, SIDA, and YFM before joining the bank as the chief research economist. Now, please welcome Dr. Chuk. Doctor, could you take the Zoom, please?
Thank you very much, Mr. Tatsushi. I'd like to share my screen. Okay, I'd like to start on behalf of the management of ECVP and ECMR by thanking you, Mr. Takashi, and your team at the SNAR for putting together this event. We welcome it, we appreciate it, and we look forward to further engagement with our stakeholders in Asia, just as the VP Khaled said. So I'll jump straight to the presentation. This is the Africa Economic Outlook, the 2020 supplement. The implication is that we had the main report in January, and as VP Khaled said, a lot of things have changed between then and now. I encourage you to also take a look at the main report. It's about developing Africa's workforce for the future. Is available on the bank's website. So this presentation will be organized in 3 different sections. In the first section, we will talk very briefly about the macroeconomic performance and prospects for Africa as a continent and different categories of economies. We'll look at the socio-economic impact of COVID-19 on Africa, and then finally we'll conclude with some policy options. So COVID-19 has reversed Africa's strong growth trajectory. For the first time in half a century, Africa is projected to fall into a recession in 2020. And we have 2 different scenarios. We have the baseline scenario and the worst case scenario. But what has become more plausible now is the worst case scenario. So in the worst case scenario, GDP is projected to fall by 3.4% in 2020. Now, to give you a sense of what that means in monetary terms, it means that for 2020, Africa is expected to lose about 173 to 236 billion worth of GDP. This is about the size of the Egyptian economy. So think about Egypt's economy just wiped out of Africa's about 3 trillion GDP for this year. However, we project a partial recovery of about 3% for 2020. Now, this recovery is projected to be partial because we anticipate that some sectors may take longer to recover. For example, those sectors that involve more social interactions, entertainment, transportation, air travel, sports, might take longer to recover. I should note, however, that this projected recovery is confronted by both downside and upside risk. Now, one of the main downside risks is the virus itself. There's been projections that there might be a second and third and fourth wave of the virus. For some countries, we've seen that the second wave is already in place. So if the virus continues, if the epidemiology of the virus continues to expand, then this recovery might not be in view in 2021. There are other domestic factors. Some governments have incorporated some stringent containment measures, and this has been causing some social unrest in some countries. Commodity prices have been subdued. If they remain subdued for a very long time, capital flight, we've seen very significant capital flight from Africa and developing countries, estimated around 90 billion, even more than what we saw during the global financial crisis. Now, if this downside risk materialize, then this recovery that we project might not be in place. But on the other side, we've been hearing good news about the progress that's been made with therapeutics and vaccines. And the countries at the frontiers have promised that the vaccine or therapeutics may be out in October or before the end of the year. So if there's a treatment for COVID-19 this year, then this our projection of a 3% recovery in 2021 will very much be in view. Now, the impact of COVID-19 and prospects for recovery varies across regions and categories of economies. Now, we classify countries into 4 different groups. And we find that the impact of the pandemic is going to be most extreme for tourism-dependent economies. Think about Seychelles, Mauritius, Sao Tome and Principe. We project that that GDP will fall by minus 10.4% in this group of countries. Other countries to be significantly affected include other resource-intensive economies such as South Africa, Botswana, Zambia, and oil exporters. In these countries, we project that GDP will fall by somewhere between minus 4 and 5 percentage points for 2020. Now, if you look on the right panel here, we try to look at the African economies by geographic classification. And you see that countries in the Eastern African region seem to be the most resilient so far. We expect that they will stay above the line. They'll still have positive growth of around 0.2%. And those 25 countries that VP Khaled was referring to, most of them are actually in East Africa. And one reason is because East African economies are relatively more diversified. Many of them don't depend on one commodity. And before the pandemic, they entered the pandemic from a position of strength with significant public investments in those economies. Southern African region might be the most affected because they entered into the pandemic, the crisis, from a position of weakness. South Africa is mostly driving the impact there. There's also Zimbabwe and Zambia. There are also structural issues with public utilities in Southern Africa before the crisis. So overall, there's heterogeneity in the impact of the pandemic on many countries in Africa, depending on the economic characteristics and the region of the country. Now, macroeconomic fundamentals are deteriorating. If you look at inflation, we've seen inflation jump by up to 5 percentage points in some countries. Think Zambia, in Angola, in Nigeria, and a couple of other countries. Now, the part of the inflation that has been increasing is mostly core inflation, food price inflation, energy prices in some of these countries. It's mostly the headline inflation. Core inflation has been relatively stable as a result of constrained demand from the lockdowns that many countries have instituted. Now, exchange rates have also fluctuated widely, especially for frontier market economies, South Africa, Zambia, and Angola. And this is because of the capital flight investors run to safety. Exchange rates have depreciated in some of these economies. However, for some countries that have pegged currencies, for example, the CFA zones, currency fluctuations have been muted in those countries. Fiscal deficits and debt levels are rising. So fiscal deficits are projected to double in 2020. At the end of 2019, the average size of fiscal deficit in Africa was around 4.4%. But at the end of this year, we expect that it might jump up to 9% of GDP. The reason is because several countries have been implementing bold and generous fiscal stimulus packages to cushion the effect of the virus. South Africa, for example, has a fiscal stimulus package of around 10.4% of GDP. And at the other extreme, you have South Sudan that has a fiscal stimulus package of around 0.1% of GDP. So there's a wide range of the size of fiscal stimulus packages, but we expect that these fiscal stimulus packages would further widen fiscal deficits in the continent. Now, debt levels are also rising. At the end of 2019, the average debt to GDP ratio for Africa, if you weight by GDP, was around 60% of GDP. Now, we project that because of the additional spending from the crisis, that debt will increase by around 10 percentage points. So that by the end of this year, the average debt level may be somewhere around 70%. But the good thing is that the bank is strongly supporting the debt service suspension initiative of multilaterals and the G20, and this is helping to mitigate debt vulnerabilities in the continent. External positions are also expected to worsen. The current account as a share of GDP at the end of 2019 was around 4.4%. By the end of 2020, we expect that it should at least double to somewhere around 8% of GDP. The reason is because countries have been drawing down on external reserves. Exports have been constrained because of the dislocation in global value chains and the likes. So this might cause current account balances to widen in the continent. Besides, foreign direct investments and remittances are also expected to contract. You know, at the end of last year, remittances was around 90 billion to Africa, remittance inflows, which is by far the most significant source of external financing to Africa, next to foreign direct investments, which was somewhere around 50 billion at the end of 2019. So we expect that remittances and FDIs might contract by 20 to 40% but before the end of 2020. So let's talk about some of the socio-economic impacts of COVID-19 on Africa. Now, although COVID-19 arrived in Africa relatively late, all 54 countries have now reported cases. There's been reported over 1.2 million cases in Africa, and there's about 30,000 deaths so far as at the end of August 2020. However, Africa has been the least affected by the virus in terms of fatality rates and the number of cases. The good news is that the curve of the pandemic is bending gradually in Africa. If you look on the chart at the right, you see that for most of the countries, it takes more than 30 days to double the cases. So the curve of the pandemic is flattening in Africa. However, there are still a couple of hotspots in the continent, in some places in South Africa, in Egypt, in Nigeria, and Algeria. So Africa is inadequately prepared to contain the pandemic from a clinical perspective. If you look at the global health, excuse me, the Global Health Security Index, 33 countries in Africa, this bars on this side, have been rated by the Global Health Security Index as being least prepared to handle epidemics of this size. Only about 21 countries are better prepared. And the global average on this rating of 100 points is around 40. Africa is just around 30% as an average. So there's need to develop Africa's health systems. There's need to improve, to upgrade health systems to help Africa become more resilient to epidemics and pandemics of this nature. Now, COVID-19 sadly has tried to reverse the gains that have been met so far in meeting the SDG goals for Africa in terms of poverty reduction and employment. Now, from 2000 until 2019, on an annual basis, Africa was reducing the rate of extreme poverty by somewhere around 1 percentage point. But for 2020 alone, the COVID-19 is expected to increase the number of people living in extreme poverty by around 2.14 percentage points. And in 2021, it could rise to up to 3.63 percentage points. The implication is that another 49 million people could be pushed into extreme poverty, in addition to the 425 million who are already living in extreme poverty in Africa. Also, because of the containment measures and the restrictions that have been put in place, we estimate that between 25,000 and 30 million jobs could be lost as a result of the fallout of COVID-19. And including the quantity of jobs available and the quality of jobs might be affected by the pandemic if adequate policy measures are not taken. This slide shows Africa's youthful demographic structure. So if we did some analysis in the background, preliminary evidence suggests that countries that have more senior citizens, that the share of people aged 65 years and above, with larger shares of people aged 65 years and above, tend to have higher fatality rates from the virus. Whereas countries in the right panel, you see, countries with higher shares of people aged 24 years and below tend to have lower fatalities from the virus. And we think that this might have helped to mitigate the impact of the pandemic on Africa. That's why Africa has not been significantly affected, because Africa, 58% exactly of Africa's population is below 24 years. So Africa has a very youthful demographic structure, and this has helped to fight back the impact of the virus on the continent. This is preliminary evidence. We are still investigating this thoroughly. So let's talk about some policy considerations on how to mitigate the impact of COVID on Africa. So because of the widespread impact of COVID-19 on Africa, policy responses need to be coordinated, they need to be well targeted, and they should be rapid. And in the report, we actually highlight many different policy levers that policymakers can adjust to help mitigate the impact and facilitate recovery from the pandemic. I think the first place to start is from the public health responses. So governments should develop effective information sharing and communication strategies. This will help to mitigate the distribution of the misinformation and disinformation that goes on usually with this kind of big events. Government should also allocate sufficient resources to the health sector. So the health sector shouldn't be a secondary sector. It should be brought up to the first tier, and resources, financial resources, can be put in the health sector to help ramp up health systems and health facilities in Africa. For fiscal policy, some of the policy measures we propose can be summarized in an op-ed by President Adesina, where he said, this is not the time for fiscal distancing. So fiscal policy should be bold, generous, and targeted at this period, and to support vulnerable households with targeted cash transfers and social safety nets, to help businesses stay afloat by providing targeted subsidies and tax reliefs. The monetary policy area too should be well covered. Central banks should seek to ease financial conditions by injecting liquidity. Already we've seen several central banks have reduced the monetary policy rates, some of them by up to 400 basis points, which is welcome. But more needs to be done in terms of deploying unconventional monetary policy, buying up assets in sectors that are most affected for airlines, entertainment industry, and those seriously affected sectors. Labor market and informal sector responses are also required. Policymakers should seek to assist vulnerable groups, especially women and youth, who work in the informal sector to stay afloat during this period. Policymakers should also seek to use active labor market policies to protect workers and their jobs. And this is time to activate flexible work environments, teleworking, and protection for those who are out of job during this period. Now, one of the most topical issues in the minds of policymakers now is how to reopen economies and accelerate recovery. And in the report, we have highlighted two different strategies. The first one is the zero tolerance strategy. In the zero tolerance strategy, governments will refrain from reopening economies until there are zero or no reported cases of new infection. Now, we don't necessarily recommend strongly this strategy because it's very expensive. What the implication is that economies will have to stay locked down, closed for a longer period of time. And in many cases, these lockdowns are blanket wholesale lockdowns. And it's very expensive, and it might cost a far more exceeding economic toll on the continent. However, we suggest that policymakers consider this staggered approach to reopening economies. In the staggered approach, what needs to happen is for governments to reopen economies based on economies and sectors based on their transmission risk. So the first step will be to reopen sectors with low to medium transmission risks, such as manufacturing, construction, and retail services. Those sectors that do not require widespread social interaction. So those sectors can be opened first, and then government can observe if there are rebounds. If there are no rebounds, the other sectors can be reopened, such as entertainment, sports, and schools and restaurants after the first observation. So I'd like to close with this last slide. So what do we take away from this presentation? Well, the key point is that despite the COVID-19 pandemic, opportunities still abound in Africa. GDP growth is projected to rebound in 2021, and the V-shaped recovery is still in view, especially if treatment for the COVID virus is out before the end of the year or by early 2021. Now, Africa, as we showed previously, has a very vibrant, youthful demographic. The implication is that Africa is ready for wide consumption and investment. Consumer business spending in Africa is estimated at 6.7 trillion per annum. It means that businesses can thrive. This is what businesses require to thrive. Significant consumption and investment by Africa's youthful population. Now, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is a game changer. And in our 2020 report, we looked in very much detail on how the CFTA can help to change the narrative for Africa. Now, the advantage of the CFTA is that you have a one-stop shop market for all of Africa's market. So it's no longer necessary to have very many piecemeal deals with different countries, partners in different countries. With just one partnership, it's possible to access all of Africa's market, which is worth over 3 trillion and 1.3 billion people. So it means that it's easier to do business in Africa because there's a free market in the zone, which is going to start off in early 2021. Also, Africa is increasingly participating in global value chains. And this is because Africa is getting more competitive. Wages are relatively lower in Africa and productivity is growing. So it's now easier for partners in Asia to set up assembly lines in Africa and produce some of their global value in Africa and ship to any part of the world, because they can take advantage of the lower wages in the continent and be more productive. Finally, the business environment in Africa has significantly improved. Between 2018 and 2019, Africa had 73 unique business environment reforms, which is the highest globally. And so it means that it's easier to start up a business in Africa. Before, it used to take around 26 days or a whole month to start a new business, but now it takes roughly around 21 days to start a business on average in Africa. So Africa is open for business. The business environment has improved. The Continental Free Trade Area is a game changer. It makes it easy to access Africa's large market, and global value chains Africa is continually being integrated in global value chains. I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to engaging further with you, our stakeholders, to discuss this. Thank you, Mr. Takashi. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chuku, for very informative and yet very concise presentation with a lot of implications, such as vulnerability due to the commodities or tourism, and also the resilience thanks to the diversification, and also the very strong point, very young demographic structure, and also the challenges posed by the capital flights or the fiscal deficit, due to the external shocks, and also the security would be the one of the biggest challenges, and also the challenges. And also the policy recommendations can be regarded as a business opportunity, especially from Asian front, and zero tolerance versus staggered approach, and still abundant opportunities. So yeah, thank you very much. Very rich outlook for the continent with both upside and downside, and variety of points, surely which are open to upcoming here in this webinar and also future discussion. So really appreciate Dr. Chuku. Okay, let us move on to guest comment part. Allow me to introduce Professor Sonobe. Professor Tetsushi Sonobe is the Dean and CEO of the Asian Development Bank Institute since April 2020. Dean Sonobe is a prominent development economist with more than 2 decades of experience analyzing the role of human capital institutions and management in industrial development in Asia, Africa, and the rest of the world. Before joining ADBI, Dean Sonobe served for 6 years as a vice president of the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, or GRIPS, GRIPS, in Tokyo. He also previously served as a professor of economics at Tokyo Metropolitan University and GRIPS. Now, please virtually welcome Professor Sonobe. Sonobe Sensei, the Zoom is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hanajiri, for very kind introduction. And thank you very much for inviting me to speak about Africa in front of so many people. More than 300 participants. Yeah, congratulations on the very successful webinar. And I'm very much happy to talk about Africa in front of so many people who are interested in investment in Africa and development of African economies. My institute is a subsidiary of Asian Development Bank, which is a kind of sibling of African Development Bank. It has 68 member countries, 49 of them are in Asia and the Pacific. And there are 19 member countries outside this region. And the Asian Development Bank has a kind of counterpart of African Economic Outlook. It is called Asian Development Outlook. So in this kind of comment, I'd like to first compare this Asian Development Outlook with African Economic Outlook, focusing on the GDP growth forecast. And then I'll talk about the advantages of Africa, and then also disadvantages, how to overcome this advantage. So here is the summary table. of the Asian Development Bank. So headquarters, which is in Manila, while my institute is located in Tokyo. So this is the headquarters economic research department's forecast for this year's growth rate. So all many regions, sub-regions have negative growth, except for East Asia, where China is included. But in the case of, at Asian Development Bank, China is called PRC. So I may say PRC, but that means China. So, and then, but for example, Central Asia, as a whole, on average, the growth rate predicted is minus 0.5% annual. But within the sub-region, there are kind of outliers. Likewise, within East Asia, which has a positive forecast growth rate as a whole on average, but Hong Kong, China will record a big negative growth. And then South Asia as a whole, minus 3%. But a country like Maldives, which is very small island state, and then heavily dependent on tourism, will suffer a huge loss. And then Southeast Asia, minus 2.7 on average. But again, Thailand, which is strong at the tourism, will suffer this year because of the big loss of the tourists. Pacific Islands, many of them are small, very tiny island states, and then many are heavily dependent on tourism, especially Fiji, so huge negative. But the next year, the growth rate will not be so low. And then developing Asia, this is a kind of special jargon. Out of 49 member countries within the region, Japan, New Zealand, and Australia are not counted as developing Asia. But Singapore, Korea, which are maybe richer than Japan, but they are still counted as part of developing Asia. So including these countries, developing Asia in total will have 0.1% economic growth, positive growth. And then next year, growth rate will go up to 6.2%. So, but 0.1%, it's not negative, but it is, it will be lowest growth rate since 1961. And then here, this diagram is a bit, complicated, but horizontal axis measures the growth rate for 2020. And then vertical axis measures the difference in 2020 growth rate compared with 2019. So all the member countries will have lower growth rate than last year. But these 11 countries, including PRC, Vietnam, and then Nepal, and then Myanmar, will have positive growth. And the size of the circle indicates maybe relative size of the economy. Okay, so PRC's circle is very large. So there are countries which are expected to have positive growth, but many have a negative growth. And then all the member countries will have lower growth rates than previous year. And then in Asia, what the government are doing in response to the coronavirus are very similar to what the African governments are doing. So type of activity, type of policies are similar, but the magnitude is different. So in Asia, the governments are pouring huge amount of money into their economies. You can see the amount of those packages in the US dollars in million, and which is maybe in total 13.8% of the region's GDP. And these are the percentage of those amount of economic packages to relative to the sub-region's GDP. Okay. And then here is a table showing where the money is going. So largest part will go to the direct support to income for individuals and small and medium enterprises. That accounts for 6.8% of the region's GDP. And then other important major items are functioning money markets, 23.2%, or the region's GDP is 3.2%. This means mostly the kind of provision of liquidity by the central banks. And the creation of credit means, the government guarantee and those things. So this is a diagram showing how those resources are poured into the private economy. So central bank provide liquidity and also encourage private credit creation, which is also helped by the government. But the government money, government packages, a large part is going to direct income support. And then the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank, and then PRC's AIIB, those are, international assistance are coming to government, and then through government direct income support and other parts. Okay, so, but of course, there are lots of downside risks. And then, for example, continued social distancing will hamper activity, recurrent outbreak are possible, and external demand is low. So even if your country, your government can manage the containment of coronavirus very nicely, but the external demand is low. So it's very difficult to have a very strong economy now. And then there may be a sovereign and financial crisis, and also social unrest the possibility cannot be eliminated. And then there may be renewed escalation in US, PRC, or China trade tensions. And then also those massive injection of the economic package, this money, huge injection itself may invite further risk because of those injection of provision of liquidity and creation of credit. So lenders, can wait the kind of postponement of payment. But once for example, US economy or European economy recovers earlier than the other parts of the world, and then they start talking about the increasing interest rate, sorry. Then suddenly the lenders in Asia may stop waiting for those repayment by the borrowers. So there may be a huge risk. And then, but these are all the kind of near-term or short-term risks. But in the long term, or very long term, what's going to happen is a kind of shift from the current situation to the very different world. For example, China or PRC is already shifting from the export-oriented economy to internal demand-driven economy. That is the reason why the PRC's forecast of growth rate is positive, right? Because other countries, other parts of the world, demand is very low. But Chinese economy can have positive growth because it has very strong internal domestic demand. So then, who will supply those light manufactured products or other products which have been supplied by China to the world? Then, obviously, the businesses are shifting from East Asia and Southeast Asia toward South Asia and Africa. And in the very long run, Africa will be the world's largest market. So naturally, the things are shifting from east to the west. Of course, there will be competition between Africa and South Asia, but that will be a good competition. And then competition is not a zero-sum game, but it will be a mutually beneficial competition, and also not only to the two regions, but also to the world as a whole. So this is the last slide, maybe a little bit old version of the last slide of the Dr. Chikuchiku's presentation material. So in this page was previously titled Implications for Asian Investors. So this is about the good things about Africa. Well, Africa's advantages, and then we all agree that Africa is within the global value chain, and then they're shifting low-cost global manufacturing to Africa. So yes, but my question is to Dr. Kuchiku is that why you stopped here? Please sell the Africa more to Asian investors. Africa has more and more advantages. So this is the next part of my story. So here is, well, this is, just an introduction. Well, Africa is, some people say, some Japanese businessman said to me that Sensei, Africa is too far, but Africa is not so far. Compared with going to Latin America, it's much, much nearer. And also, if you leave the late night or midnight, maybe Haneda for Africa to the, for the Middle East, then you can sleep very well in the flight. And then you can, maybe if you leave the Saturday night, then you will arrive in the East Africa in the afternoon of Sunday. Then you can start business from Monday morning, and then you can relax, and then you are very fresh. So it's not very far, not at all inconvenient. And then there are huge, great talent in Africa. So this is just a dozen of the PhD students I taught. And then I have another dozen. And then among these 12 people, 5 are from South Asia and 7 are from Africa. And then they are all government officers. They are very elite people, but I don't see any difference. They are all very competitive, and they all successfully completed the PhDs, and they are now at a very high position in their governments. So there are talent, but not just in the public sector, but in the private sector, young entrepreneurs, talents, capabilities are enormous. But then the question may be like this: if there are such a talent, business talent, and also public sector talent, why the Africa and development was so delayed, and why those African business people successful in the United States or Europe do not come back to Africa and start business and provide lots of jobs for the other African people? But most likely answer would be these disadvantages. One is infrastructure. So although there has been a great progress in transportation, community infrastructure in Africa, compared with maybe early 2000, 2002 or 2003, when I began visiting Africa, So totally different now. But how about the quality of workers? So for Asian investors, this is a very important issue. Can workers, you can trust workers in Africa, or you can expect African workers who are willing to learn what they have to know in order to produce something or provide some services for the consumers. Please remember what happened in East Asia before. When the Westerners began coming to Japan in the Meiji era, so many of them wrote in their diary that, oh, Japanese are terrible liars, terrible, very, very lazy, and then they cannot have any development in future. But great economic development took place in Asia, Japan. And even after the World War II, like 1950s, Japanese labor was, highly, unionized. The labor union, trade union was extremely strong. So it was very difficult for investors to invest in Japan. How about China in 1990s? Japanese businessmen said, Chinese are hopeless. Or how about the Thailand or Indonesia or Japanese people? Even in the late 1990s, I met many Japanese businessmen who are working in the Bangkok, Thailand, or Jakarta, Indonesia. They are always complaining, oh, these people are very slow, these people are not punctual. But what happened was, this is a photo from Thailand. This is the Eastern Seaboard. So it's a great development. And now the place is called Detroit in Asia. So it's a kind of center of automobile industry in Asia. And I have to conclude very quickly. So this is economics, professions, most respected academic journal called Quarterly Journal of Economics. So in 2013, so this journal's first issue in the year, and then first paper was about management in India. So the authors are all famous people, the top researcher in the World Bank, and Stanford professor rising star or great star, Nicholas Blue, and the World Bank's David McKenzie, and John Roberts, another Stanford great economist. These people investigated what's going on in the textile factories in India. So this is these factories would employ 200, 300 workers. But even in India, within the factory, there are this kind of garbages and also the materials, because this is a textile industry, materials is young. Yarn are just accumulated without labeling. So the people do not know in which package what kind of yarn is in, so they cannot use this stock. So there are huge inefficiencies. So then, in developed country factories, this kind of thing is never happen. More efficient, more, they work more effectively. But in India, workers are not effectively, not working efficiently, because managers, owners do not know even the basics of the standard management, which is just a common sense in the developed economies. So how about Africa? Yeah, Africa situation is very similar. But when I conducted a kind of the experiment, and then I asked the business consultant to teach very basic of management. And those business owners in Africa came to me and, Professor, you did a great thing. They say they have been operating business for 15 years, 20 years, but they are just throwing money away. So because they didn't know to keep record, to manage training, would had a very strong impact. After maybe 2 years and almost 3 years, then the very statistically significant impact on the business performance. So let me wrap up. So in the near term, high level of uncertainty in both Africa and Asia are expected. So there will be ups and downs. Those things are inevitable. But in the long run, Asia has a problem of aging. And also in the very long run, Africa will become the largest market in the world. And then in the medium to long run, the economic development in Africa depends on the pace of addressing inadequate infrastructure and the workability, or the kind of limit. And then this very limited low level of workability of the people who are not highly educated or just came from the rural area, those people, their wage rate is low, but in terms of kind of efficiency or effectiveness, then they are very costly. So that's why they cannot be really employed. And that's a really, deep root cause of limited inclusiveness of African economy. So how to address these problems will determine the medium run or long run economic development in Africa. So I already talked about people. Then my message is, okay, situation is not very different from South Asia. And then the good thing is that people are willing to learn if those training and those things are provided. Okay. Then the remaining question for me is, how about the infrastructure? Okay. So Dr. Chikuchiku, I'd like to listen to you about this infrastructure development. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Professor Sonobe, for indicating very, very interesting points, mainly similarity of challenges and policy responses, but very different magnitude, and also the outlook which two regions are facing. And yes, now liquidity is very abundant, and it's a good thing in a sense. The last century, for example, the so-called Asian financial crisis, we have the liquidity shortage, and because of that, many countries suffered a lot. So now the central bankers are very positive and also the aggressive about providing liquidity. So maybe we learned a little bit from the history, and also you indicate a very rich statement. The lessons learned from the history, and maybe the challenges and the shortcoming right now is very similar between the Africa and South Asia or other part of Asia. And also the sending very encouraging message. Africa is not far. To be, very honest, it's still far, but not so far to Asian private sector business community who are very interested in investment and business in Africa. So it's really inspiring, and I love the arrow mark, big arrow mark from Asia to Africa. Maybe in the longer term, but maybe mid-term, who knows? So thank you very much for the very inspiring presentation. I really appreciate your dedication and also the contribution to make it very timely. So now, before moving on to Q&A session, I would like to ask two gentlemen, presenter and commentator, to have some interactive discussion, which I believe will pave the way towards the in-depth understanding of this unprecedented situation all over the world, especially on Africa and on Asia. So firstly, Dr. Chukchuk, firstly, could you answer to the question Professor Sonobe has raised at the end of his presentation? And possibly, do you have any question or point you want to know about Professor Sonobe's view? Thank you. Over to you.
The recovery for Africa depends on, the infrastructure base that we build up. And the bank estimates that between 130, the financing required to close Africa's infrastructure gap is between 130 billion and 170 billion. But the good thing is that a significant part of the bank's portfolio is invested towards infrastructure development, both hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure. And the bank is working on a high 5 priority, and 3 of them, half of the bank's priorities are on infrastructure. There's Light Up and Power Africa, Integrate Africa, Industrialize Africa. All of these priorities have to do with building capacity, building hardcore infrastructure and soft infrastructure. If you look in the last annual report, you will see that around 65% of the bank's entire portfolio is invested towards infrastructure. So infrastructure, there's a gap which is something that policymakers need to work to close, and the bank has been supporting regional member countries to build this infrastructure, especially infrastructure that connects between countries, that interlinks countries. So, and we found in some research we've done in the past that digital infrastructure has a very strong multiplier effect on the rest of the economy. So infrastructure is key, and we agree, and the bank is focusing on that, and we are happy to learn from some of the experiences of South Korea, how they managed to upgrade infrastructure in a very short period of time. So I saw in your charts, I'll just like to throw this question, pose this question to you. The impressive thing I saw was that Asian economies have been deploying significant fiscal stimulus packages. In East Asia, I saw that in your chart is 15.2% of GDP. I thought that was very impressive. Are there any lessons we could learn from the strategies for deploying this size of fiscal stimulus packages? Is there anything that African policymakers can learn on what sources, avenues to mobilize this size of resources? And at the same time, ensure that fiscal and debt sustainability is not compromised. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, as I emphasized, and then as you point out, so those economic packages are really massive, intervention. But how about the fiscal discipline and the monetary counterparts? So many people are wondering, but people, think that it's not time to talk about those, future problems. And in order to survive now, so this kind of, assistance, aid, support are needed. So if the two policymakers talk and with different opinions, then of course the one with the kind of more positive, that attitude will win the debate in this current situation. That's why the economic package expanded. But what will happen in the future, or nobody knows. And then on the one side, such a massive deployment of resources may be a good thing, but also, as I already said, it can be a great source of risk. So, yeah, nobody knows what will happen. And then, for Africa, yeah. I think I have no theory or no experience to say that Africa should follow the Asian example.
Thank you very much, Professor Sonobe and Dr. Chuku. And yes, thank you to gentlemen. We can continue this on and on and on, but maybe we better be moved on to the question and answer session. So once again, thank you very much, Professor Sonobe and Dr. Chuku. Really appreciate the energizing discussion. And Q&A session. Now we are, very interesting part. And time management, so far, so very good. Considering we have the starting time a little bit late. So, and we have the brain behind the scene. Under the kind guidance of the bank's selected economists group, I firstly pick up questions provided in advance in text or in live. So the number one would be the question: insecurity has become a major antagonist to Africa's socio-political and economic stability. Any light soon at the end of the dark tunnel? That's the Mr. Babachund Bamidil Piamil. Sorry for my poor pronunciation, but maybe this question will go to Dr. Chuku. So over to you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Babatunde Bamidele for the question. So is there any lights at the long tunnel for conflict and security? I think there is light. So the COVID-19 crisis can be an opportunity in the sense that governments can seize this opportunity to foster legitimacy and cooperation with the citizens, because it's difficult to implement any COVID-19 health-related interventions without cooperation from the citizenry. So this crisis is an opportunity for fighting, warring forces to lay down their arms and talk together and come together to see how to fight the crisis, which is an enemy of both. For example, people who are involved in riots, terrorist groups. So the virus is an enemy to everyone. So it can be an opportunity to close mending fences. But if you look in the data also, there's been improvements in governance indicators. If you look in CPIA, if you look in the worldwide governance index, there's been marginal improvements though in governance in Africa. And recently, several elections are coming up this year. More countries are becoming more democratic. There are a few issues here and there in Libya, Mali, and a few countries. But yes, part of the bank's role is to build capacity to help countries also improve institutions and governance systems. So I think this crisis can be used as an opportunity to come together to fight a common enemy and take care of these conflict-related issues in Africa.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chuku. Yes, it's a head and tail of the same coin. Yeah, it's really difficult, but it's an opportunity. So thank you very much. So let me turn to the question number 2. How can we tell advantage of Africa's youthful generation to help mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on the economy, since most youths have been rendered jobless due to this nasty virus? Lincoln Kisandi, Mr. Lincoln Kisandi. So yeah, maybe again, I would like to turn to Dr. Chuku, but after that, I might want to, I would like to want to turn to the Professor Sonobe for his view. So Dr. Chuku, please.
Thank you very much again, Mr. Takashi, and thanks to Lincoln for the question. I think Professor Sonobe had some slides where he spoke to this question. So in the main report of the AU for this year, the 2020 African Economic Outlook, the theme was developing Africa's workforce for the future. In that report, we highlight some of the key things that we can do for Africa's youth. It's true that Africa's youth is serving now as a type of shock absorber to the impact of the pandemic on Africa. But what we can do is to build capacity. We need to build capacity. We need to do more learning. Especially, we found that the kind of training that is required for the future for accelerating recovery is numeracy learning, coding, and the bank has a very big program on jobs for youth, where youth are trained on how to code, how to write code. We're working with Facebook and other big digital giants. So I think that the way to take advantage of the youthful demographic and reap the youth dividend is to develop the capacity that is required for the nature of the work of the future. And that's the digital economy that we are now living in. So the youth should be developed with numeracy, internet skills, digital skills, and so on. I think that's one way to take advantage of the youthful demographics for Africa. Thanks.
Yes, and in some, even before the coronavirus outbreak, in some African countries had very high unemployment rate for those young people who finished university. So then some people say, oh, those university graduates must be too theoretical and they're not so useful in the factory or offices. But yeah, that may be half true. But there must be also another reason is that the reason can be on the side of the employers too. Employers may not really know how to handle those young people or unskilled workers or both skilled workers, and because they themselves not really understand the good human resource management or financial management and marketing and the efficient flow of work, those things. So there are lots of room for improvement. So if the African Development Bank is interested in those, for example, study research about impacts to assess impacts of that kind of training program, yeah, let's work together.
Thank you very much, two gentlemen. Yeah, yes, and actually, the Africa's population-wise, the mid this century, Africa's population will be almost the same as the China and India combined. Yeah, in the midst of this century. So the employment, unemployment, or the workforce would be a huge difference maker. So thank you very much for your answer to that very pertinent questions. So let me move on to the number 3. Question number 3. You promised, the Dr. Chuku promised you are focused on the V-shaped recovery on the condition that the vaccine is available in early 2021. Does this presume that the vaccine will be distributed in Africa with the same speed as elsewhere? Are there any preconditions on this? The question posed by the Mr. David Simpson. So please, Dr. Chuku.
Thank you very much, David. David is a participant. I read a recent article by Pedros, the head of the WHO, and he was soliciting for solidarity in the development of the vaccines. So our view is that we expect that when the vaccine is ready later this year or early next year, that it should be available to Africa as soon as it is ready. Now, the question about if there are any preconditions, Well, since we're economists, I think the health professionals will have to set the criteria for the preconditions that need to be met before these vaccines are deployed. But we are optimistic that if a vaccine is available, as soon as it is available, because of the nationalism that multilateral institutions have been trying to foster, we anticipate that this vaccine should be available to everyone in the world, including people in Africa. And that's why we are expecting this V-shaped recovery. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yeah, you reminded us that's what the multilateral institutions are for. Yes, the international cooperation is tested, and we should answer. So thank you very much. Very encouraging answer. And question number 4, yeah, I'd like to move. Can you please give us an idea of debt sustainability analysis for African countries in light of COVID-19? What has been the response of the G20 under the debt service suspension initiative? Oh, yeah, the questioner is the managing director of the Indian Exim Bank. So hello, sir, David Laskinha. Thank you very much. Over to you, Dr. Chukwu.
Thank you very much, Managing Director David. So this is a very important question in our view. The DSSI is designed to help countries create fiscal space by suspending their debt service for 2020. And now there's a negotiation to extend this until 2021. 39 countries are qualified for the DSSI, the Debt Service Suspension Initiative from Africa. As of 31st of August, 29 African countries had already subscribed to the program. So in my view, the program has been well received. A lot of countries, 29 countries have already subscribed to the program, and it's helping them. So this year they don't have to pay for their debt service obligations. They can postpone it until next year or next 2 years. There are, however, a couple of issues. So there are a couple of issues with rating agencies that have suggested that if some frontier market economies opt into the program, they'll be downgraded. And so multilateral institutions have been trying to negotiate with these rating agencies not to implement this criteria, because being part of the DSSI, the countries should not be penalized for subscribing to the DSSI. So I would say that the program has been, the response has been well received, because it asks what is the nature of the response. And the African Development Bank is particularly supporting this program, because the bank is our vice president for regional development integration, could probably speak to this if he's still around. But the bank is using budget support programs and several instruments to support countries, over 10 billion of US dollars. And the idea is that countries will not have to pay their debt service obligations to the bank this year until, until next year and further notice, so that they can spend that money to cushion the impact of the crisis on their economy. So debt sustainability, I will say before the pandemic, there were 8 countries that were in debt distress in Africa, and another 11 of them were at high risk of debt distress. Now, because of this suspension, we are waiting until the end of the year to see which countries, but we expect that a few more countries might be having more debt issues before the end of the year. But these programs that multilateral institutions are putting together will help to mitigate some of the vulnerabilities in debt in the continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chukwu. Yes, debt sustainability is would be the upcoming challenges for all over the world, and especially it's really odd, because all of the world is kind of thinking from the viewpoints of the credit rating wise. So it's really, how can I say, challenging and interesting situations. And yeah, so the credit rating is a very important infrastructure for the capital markets, and at the same time, it is, in a sense, in my strictly personal view, in a sense, it's a game of the rule. So if the rule doesn't fit, we have to change it. So it's we are living in a very, very interesting, challenging historical moment of the time. So thank you very much, Mr. Chukwu. And yes, we already passed the time, but I might be able to go into another questions. So questions number 5, maybe the last one, would be the Asian countries have shown resilience through the COVID-19 pandemic. What factors explain this? And what can African countries learn from that? So obviously, this question is firstly bound to Professor Sonobe. And if possible, I would like to invite Dr. Chukwu's additional comment. So over to you, Professor Sonobe. Thank you.
So Asian resilience. Yeah, I believe it comes from the kind of trust of the people. So people trust each other and solidarity. So Africa also have this, I believe. How about, how do you think, Dr. Chuk?
No, I agree absolutely. I'll tell you, we have a small box in the report, and what we did is to zoom in on South Korea and try to try to see what has made South Korea a relatively successful country in containing the virus. And we found 3 main factors. You can call it the 3 T's. And just like you said, Professor Sonobe, the first one is the trust factor. The citizens need to trust the government in order to follow the interventions and the recommendations for the crisis period. There's also transparency. So the governments need to be transparent. What are they doing? When are you reopening the economies? How soon can you get your tests? So there's trust, there's transparency, and there's technology. Technology has been deployed for contact tracing and things like that. So these 3 factors need to be in place for a country to successfully deal with this situation. Technology needs to be deployed for testing, contact tracing, and the likes. There needs to be trust between the citizenry and the government, and there needs to be transparency in what the government is doing. And I think if these 3 fundamentals are in place, then it's easier to succeed in containing the virus. So I agree with you, Professor Sonobe.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chukwu. Although I said the last question, maybe I can go to one last question. So question number 6, do you plan to update your estimates of the impact of the COVID-19, given that the pandemic situation has certainly changed since the time you made your estimates? So it goes to you, Dr. Chukwu. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I should say that the process for the update is already on. I think the next, because we have a statistics department that collects the data from all the countries and thus runs it in a model, gets the assumptions, consult with us before we come up with a consensus estimate. So that process is already on, and we expect that by early October or before the end of October, the new updates should be out. So yes, and once they're out, we are open to. We'll have the new report, which we can share the updated results, the updated projections, and our updated analysis. So that's in the process, and it should be out very soon.
Thank you very much. And yeah, that's the beauty of economists. You are working tirelessly, and congrats and gratitude for that. So thank you. It is regrettable to say, but it is about time. So, okay, one last word. Dr. Chukwu and Professor Sonobe, please share one last word with us. Maybe the Professor Sonobe first, and then Dr. Chukwu. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that this seminar or workshop was a great success. Thanks to Dr. Chukwu's great work. Yeah, congratulations. Yeah, very nice.
Thank you very much, Professor Sonebe. Your intervention was very helpful to do the comparison and analysis. So my last word is to our stakeholders in the Asia region. It's true that there are some downsides to Africa's economic prospects, but I'd like to assure you that Africa is open for business. The V-shaped recovery that we are anticipating is still in view. We expect that next year countries will pick up. I like that chart you showed, that arrow you showed, Professor Sonebe. So businesses are moving to Africa. You can set up your factories in Africa because it's now more competitive, productivity is higher, wages are lower, and connect to other regions of the world. So our last message is that we are open to business, and we're looking forward to more of these seminars. This is the first one, and we can engage with you. We thought we could have time to actually let people in the audience also speak out, but Professor Takashi has asked us to stop now. So thank you. We look forward to partnering with our stakeholders in Asia. That's my last one.
Thank you very much to gentlemen. Before we really close the event, I would like to let wonderful audience know that we will not be over yet. Actually, we have just begun. So please show the slide. FTB headquarters and Asia office will organize 2 more webinars only within this month solely. These 2 events will provide practical information and advice for Asian companies to do more business in Africa with the AFDB, African Development Bank. So yes, the AFDB webinar for Asian private sector on doing business in Africa next Wednesday, the 23rd September. And next slide, please. FDB webinar for the Japanese private sector, 29th September. So we would like to recommend all of you from private sector and people who are interested in Asia-Africa business to register this event. Registration is now available and participation can find more information on the bank's website. That's it for now. So once again, thank you very much. Until next time, let us stay safe, healthy, committed, connected, and resilient. Have a great afternoon and night for Asia. Have a great rest of the day in Africa. And see you very soon. Goodbye.